Hello, I'm Maryann DiEdwardo. I am presenting a paper for the New Jersey College English Association. My main thesis, Intertextuality, African American Literary Heritage. We research and integrate. Nella Larson, Toni Morrison, Zora Neale Hurston, Ann Patry. Nella Larson, born 1891 and died 1864, an important figure in the history of writing about equality. In Quicksand, Larson uses concepts which concern the space of trauma. In Chapter 1, Larson writes, quote, "She loved this tranquility, this quiet following the fret and strain of the long hours spent among fellow members of a carelessly unkind and gossiping faculty." Unquote. Research for the background will use the summary of passages from the Wiley Blackwell Anthology of African American Literature. The Wiley text is poignant, with the presentation of short biographical sketches before important works. For example, in the text, we can study a series of authors who represent important historical periods of African American literature. The biographical section about Nella Larson is quite compelling. Although some scholars have dismissed her as a real-life version of her characters, Helga Crane and Claire Kendry, the tragic mixed-race protagonists in these novels, Larson's public career was defined less by pathology and more by her ability to uncover the psychology and pretensions of European America and the African American middle class with whom she has often been identified. As the mixed-race daughter of a working-class Danish-American woman and raised in the rough neighborhoods of Chicago, she fit no more naturally in African American high society than she did among neighboring whites. Nella Larson's Quicksand and Passing are novels which represent signs of loss. I practice searching for praxis of the study of semiotics in lectures, essays, and books. Praxis is the ability of the writer to achieve a high moment of clarity about the human condition. Praxis joins together the sign of cultural change with the literary elements of characterizations and plot. The creator then creates multiple fields for readers to use to base their visit to the fictional world. Creation of narrative eventually demands characterization and other devices, such as dialogue and dramatic effect, within the creative space of the fictional world. Let us define that creative process and relate to the use of narrative as a semiotic vision. A narrative in the fictional world makes the characters at risk of failure. Nella uses the humanity of her own experiences as the principle of her fiction work. Nella Larson's novel Passing is centered on the narrative by a fictional character, Claire Kendry, a light-skinned biracial woman living as a white woman. In this way, this novel breaks down the thematic binary of white and black. In addition to the sign of binary white and black, Larson's novel simultaneously explores the theme of gender. The historical, cultural, and literary function of the novel is a genre of change. Quicksand and Passing, we study recurring forms and techniques of the form as narrative and a dominant literary social document. Projects that we teach students based on the writing of Nella Larson may become a novella or a book chapter with an awareness of responsibilities to create a novel. With a class based on the creative narrative of Nella Larson, we emphasize a study of diversity, understanding global perspective, cultural awareness of diverse peoples through analytical strategies, close reading, the analysis of figurative language, and the comprehension of narrative structure. Next, my readings signify the message of Toni Morrison as a writer who designs Poetics as the cause of the work. Morrison's beloved is a signifier of the importance of the spiritual in writing and language. In fact, Morrison creates the voice of a dead child to represent spirituality through myth. My model in writing is Morrison. I realize we are writing to find ourselves. Applicable to the study of Toni Morrison, the writing of oneself represents our search for words to describe situations. Linguistic tone often manipulates us. We must be determined to find our own truths based on our own experiences. Perhaps an overview of such second-wave feminists as Zora Neale Hurston connects the determination of Toni Morrison to engage human dignity for all women. I journal about my thinking, small notebooks, and I try to recall in books to journal, to teach, and to engage in semiotics. Place offers us an anthropological view of the feminine as a spiritual quest. Zora Neale Hurston writes authentic expressions to define place. Zora's short story, Black Death, reveals the curious pressures Hurston felt both as a writer and folklorist, making it in many ways her most interesting story of the 1925-1927 period. Place serves as a mythic representation. Stories are openings into the soul. Derived from the Latin, intertextuality, to intermingle while weaving, is a term that was first introduced by French semiotician Julia Kristeva in the late 1960s. According to Kristeva, a literary work is not simply the product of a single author, but of its relationship to language itself. Intertexts are historical and social, which transform and reflect literary practices. Furthermore, Haitian folklore. Zora Neale Hurston, 1943 interview. Famous author discusses zombies, and the works of Zora Neale Hurston underlie important elements of the archetype that still carry vital information for scholars who wish to create a pedagogical and fundamentally purposeful basis for zombie characters in poetry as scholarship in literary classes. Evaluation of Hurston's story, Black Death, brings haunting place through language. We find ourselves as passengers on journeys into the creative process of a great voice in the story of Hurston, by Hurston. She shows us how to be curious of all of life, even the harder parts to understand. She shows us how to be curious about death, and a dead human is a wailing creature or zombie. It is the curious and the metaphysical originating from Plato that comes to us as life reflects the spiritual. Zora writes in the following in Black Death, quote, "In the swamp at the head of the lake, she saw jack-o'-lanterns," unquote. Maryann P. Writing for survival during a pandemic, I am teaching a wide sector of the population in universities and colleges around the globe. To develop voice, I use the writing of African American authors to teach the form and function of equality, justice, and cultural poetics. What is the function of literature and personal voice? One can capture peace in the self and self-efficacy through reading as a function of being. Feminist inquiry of African American literary elements. Most importantly, apply feminist views of equality and diversity as well as related peace studies through projects such as this one, Share African American History through the study of literature, 20th and 21st century. Maryann P.'s The Street was the first novel by a Black woman to sell more than 1 million